I'm Tass Mellis of The Starters.
This is Ben Golliver with the Open Floor Podcast.
Hi, I'm Kristen Ludlow from NBA Inside Stuff.
I'm OG Anunoby of the Toronto Raptors.
Hey, I'm Elena Deladon, and welcome to the Double Clutch.
Double Clutch.
Double Clutch
Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Double Clutch Podcast. I'm one of your usual hosts, Mike Miller, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Dr Justin Quinn, one of our writers at Double Clutch, a resident American, although he is actually a non-resident American because he's in Mexico City, if you can work that one out. Justin, welcome to the show. Good to finally have you on.
Yeah, thanks, Ben.
We usually, when a new person starts, we just sort of do an introduction for everyone. I would say new person starts. You're first time on the pod. I mean, you've obviously been writing for us for a while now. So just tell us about how you got into the NBA and a bit of your background.
Oh boy, that's a mouthful right there. I grew up 90 minutes south of Boston. So like many people who grew up in the general vicinity of that city, I became a Celtics fan by accident of birth. And when I say fan, I mean it was on in the background and older people in my family would be shouting at the television and that sort of thing. So I mean, I was always watching basketball, but I wouldn't really have called myself a fan until maybe I was about 13 years old, and ironically, it was not the Boston Celtics that got me into basketball, but standing around in a department store and noticing something really weird was going on. No one was in it. Everyone was all clustered in the electronics department. So I walked over to the electronics department to see what was going on in this department store, and everyone was glued to the wall of televisions tuned into a basketball game. And I didn't really know who the team was, but I saw Connecticut, so I kind of pieced out that they were a local. They were, the University of Connecticut. But at the time, I was 13 years old. I didn't know that much about college basketball. Mm-hmm. And I basically had a real brief explanation as to what was going on by one of the people there. What was happening was there was about a second left of game time, and for the University of Connecticut to defeat Clemson, they would have had to throw the ball up the entire court and shoot it in the air in one fluid motion for it to count, basically. And everyone was like, the game's over, but we're watching anyway. And it went in. And everyone completely lost their minds, and I made up my mind at that point that I needed to learn more about this. If it could take 30, 40, 50 adults and just completely transform them into wild beasts, I needed to know more about it. So that got me through the wilderness area of the Boston Celtics. I tried watching them while I learned about basketball, but anyone who remembers the mid-1990s, early to mid-1990s, it was not a good time to be a Celtics fan. So that's what got me into basketball more generally. But then many years later, I went to the University of Florida, got my PhD. But while I was working on it, you have to do a lot of writing as an academic for grants, for publications, for your dissertation. And I started blogging for fun in the morning just to kind of get my brain in the mode for writing, because I'm not one of those people who can just turn it on. I need to really I need to get a lot of coffee in me, obviously, but also just to try to focus on the act of writing itself. And eventually I realized the things that I want to do in academic writing, which is basically just, explore the way we exist as humans with other humans in ways we don't normally think about, particularly when it relates to inequality, injustice, systematic problems in society. I realized that academics, no one reads them. No one, just other academics. And people really dug the stuff that I was able to bring in terms of using analytics in ways that I did in my academic research, and using social theory to frame certain debates. It allowed me to engage with something that was way more imminent in people's lives. And for me, honestly, way more fun, because I'm getting feedback from people, not rejection letters from publications that want me to pay them to publish my work. So
sure.
Quite an unusual route, I guess. I mean, I do see a lot of teachers among MBA writers, but definitely not how I expected to become one.
Yeah, that's a really different origin story, I guess, in terms of how you became a writer. It's quite fascinating, and obviously the sort of articles you've written for us have a completely different spin to them than a lot of the other things that we produce. I mean, it's quite an interesting sport as well to pick in terms of talking about the social theories and things like that you mentioned, because obviously with so much going on in this league, and with it being a league that is not necessarily a reflection of stereotypical America, there's probably quite a broad scope for, I guess, putting those theories across in a new light. Would that be fair?
It would be. I mean, for me, one of the things that has me most interested in the NBA are the social aspects of it, when players agitate for more control over their careers or more earnings. I want to know more about the structural conditions that contribute to the day-to-day existence of the NBA, whether that's expansion, which obviously you've noted is one of my favorite topics, but as well as just like you really quotidian things, like what would happen if instead of having so many fouls in a game, we just gave them a point in possession? Would that be terrible, or would that be a good idea? So looking at things like that are what really grabs my attention. And being here in Mexico, where I did my PhD research, particularly at a time now that we have a G League team coming here, and the potential for a full-fledged franchise in the not too distant future, if it all goes well, and they want to keep expanding. That also really shapes my interest of the sport as more of a global media phenomenon, and how people engage with it and how people engage topics related to it.
Yeah, it's quite fascinating. It's great to have you on. So let's jump into yesterday's. Well, it was MLK Day in the NBA. For anyone who's a first-time listener, if you're not already following us, go to @DoubleClutchUK on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. If you want to give us feedback, ask us questions, anything like that, hit us up at admin@doubleclutch.uk. As I said, MLK Day yesterday, so it's a huge day in the NBA. 14 games, only 2 teams didn't play who are playing tonight. That's Dallas and the LA Clippers. There were some really huge scorelines as well in terms of production from individual players. Damian Lillard set several franchise records with 61 points, 10 rebounds, 7 assists, 11 of 20 from three-point land. Ben Simmons, 34, 12 and 12. Trae Young, 42, 6 and 15 assists in a loss. That's madness. Russell Westbrook, 32, 11 and 12 in a loss. Alec Burke, a name I wouldn't put up there, 33, 7 and 8 with 2 blocks. It was madness yesterday. But the biggest upset, perhaps, then, was nicely tying in with you being on the show as an almost Bostonian. The Lakers, 107. The Celtics, 139. LA were favoured to win the game, but lost by 32. You were doing the recap for one of the sites you write for, Celtics Wire. What were your takes on the game? How overexcited did you get at the destruction of your arch nemesis team?
I will say I was ready for another seething disappointment as the game started. I have to watch some of the games I recap usually behind my computer as I do some online teaching. I would love it if just writing paid all my bills, but you gotta pay that stuff. And I was watching it, and I was just like, oh no, here we go again. They started with the same, not real organized offense, not, moving the ball, not really staying connected on defense, just like they have through many of their recent losses. And I was really prepared for it. Little by little, they started turning it around until they started really breaking out in the second quarter. And when in the third quarter, when Jaylen Brown ended up dunking on LeBron, mercifully my class was almost over because I needed to turn the class off and turn my attention to the game. I literally almost shouted, that was one of the best dunks I've seen in quite some time. He got a tech for his effort. But it was quite a contest. It ended up turning out to be the Celtics that we really thought weren't going to happen this season, but evidently are not as much of a pipe dream as recent games have showed us. LeBron kind of rolled over a little bit after that. I really thought that he was just going to demolish the Celtics after basically getting posterized by Jalen, and it just didn't happen. The lead kept getting bigger and bigger, got up to like 34 points at one time. I'm a little scared to see what's going to happen when we, as if I'm a member of the Celtics, when the Celtics go to Staples Center in February. I think we're going to see some comeuppance because, if we're being honest, this was a really good performance by the Celtics, and Anthony Davis was just not himself. He fell on his posterior pretty hard several games ago and has missed, I think, 4 games, maybe 5 games up until this one. And I don't think he was quite ready. He was really just not moving around the floor the way he usually does, swatting shots and grabbing boards. So I don't know. I'm really excited that we got the win, and I think that it's going to do a lot to help reset what has basically been a really tough January for them with, back-to-backs and almost every week and a game every other day when there isn't one. So it's going to be really helpful for them, but I'd also like to caution, as many others have, that this is not clear-cut evidence that the Celtics are contenders. They just had a really good game at a time when the Lakers had one of their worst games of the seasons. I don't think it's really much of a decisive statement about either team at this point. What about you?
I think that's a fair assessment. AD, first game back, 9 points, 4 rebounds, 2 assists. Not the Anthony Davis that is likely to be on the court in a few weeks' time. Jason Tatum had a fantastic game. Jaylen Brown, obviously, that dunk, that was just disgusting.
Filthy.
It was incredible. I'm kind of disappointed your class didn't get just a random. That's one of the greatest dunks I've ever seen! Exclamation, because it deserved it. I'm trying to think where I land on these Celtics, because you're right. This was a better than normal performance for them, but at the same time, it's something I think they're capable of doing regularly. Like maybe not the difference in final score won't be as huge because the Lakers wouldn't be as bad, but certainly this team is capable, with the many different sort of points of attack it has, of being a team like this and really sort of not necessarily coming out of the East, but certainly challenging to a place they probably should have been 2 seasons ago.
That's the kicker right there, is coming out of the East, because we can feel good about beating the Lakers all we want as Celtics fans, but realistically there's 3, maybe 4 teams at the top of the East that Boston will have to potentially get through in the postseason, and they haven't been anywhere near as commanding in the victories they have had over those teams, and they've lost a fair amount of them too, particularly Philadelphia. So before we get all excited about that, I would like to see, really, if we're being honest, the Lakers as well. Both teams really need some more depth. I mean, the Lakers need some insurance in case anybody turns an ankle, and really the Celtics do too. I mean, if Jaylen Brown or Jason Tatum, God forbid, ended up having to miss a couple of games, even from a minor injury, hamstring pull or anything like that, it could spell the end of their postseason, even in the first round. So a lot of work to be done still.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the rough run they've just had, the Celtics, and Brown's obviously frustratingly had a ligament in his thumb as sort of holding him out of games, and that really annoyed me yesterday that he actually played in the end, because I dropped him from my fantasy team far earlier in the day, because I just figured he wouldn't be there and I needed all the points I could get from across the board. But I'm not holding that against him whatsoever for that dunk alone. I will let him off. Do you think there's anything out there that the Celtics can do in the trade market this year? They're not usually active players.
No, I think, though, that if we're being realistic and you look at the roster, there's just too many rookies. They have 1, 2, potentially 4 picks coming in this draft, maybe even 5 if an unlikely protected pick becomes available towards the end of the second round. They're going to have to let some of these guys go, whether it's letting them walk in free agency or combining them and trying to retain value by upgrading to somebody who can actually shoot or score off the bench. I mean, a lot of these guys that they have, they might eventually be able to compete. But, I mean, if we're being honest, the Celtics team, they have a small chance of competing this year and a good chance next year. So why not just get a jump on things if there is a trade out there? I don't know if it makes sense to overbid on some older players, but maybe they could find the right sort of player available, even if it's on an expiring deal. They might be able to convince them to re-sign if things are looking good. Because I won't say any names. I don't want to piss any particular players off, but there's just too many younger guys on this team who are going to take too long to develop to be realistically useful in the time frame they're going to be needed. And really the same thing is true of the Lakers, though not because of youth, but because of age and because of contract situations. So, I mean, they're in a lot of ways competing for similar players.
I think it's going to be difficult for the next couple of years in Boston in general with how well until potential exit of Giannis. That's a huge roadblock in the East. Let's move off from the Celtics though, but still have sort of 1 foot in the in the Celtics camp for a minute. Let's talk about one of Boston's favourite sons. Let's move over to Kyrie Irving.
Oh boy!
Because I like poking the bear a bit.
Sure.
So he returned from absence. I think it was 23 games he missed. 26 games because the Nets went 13-13 during that time. And he came up with a couple of wonderful quotes recently. The first one was against a loss to Philadelphia last week, when he said, and I apologise for the monologue here, but I mean, it's transparent. It's out there. It's glaring in terms of the pieces that we need in order to be at that next level. I'm going to continue to reiterate it. We're going to do the best with the guys that we have in our locker room now, and we'll worry about all the other stuff in terms of moving pieces and everything else as an organisation down the line in the summer. It's just something that we signed up for. We knew what we were getting into at the beginning of the season. Guys were going down left and right. GT, Garrett Temple, is out. DJ, DeAndre Jordan, just got hurt tonight. Wilson, Chandler is coming back. We've got complementary young guys as well that have done a great job the last 3 years. Collectively, I feel like we have great pieces, but it's pretty glaring that we need one more piece or two more pieces that will complement myself, KD, DJ, GT, Spence, who's Spence Dinwiddie, Karis, LeVert, and we'll see how that evolves. So that rather long quote was cut down a bit and republished and recirculated and set the internet ablaze last week. What was your take on it as a completely objective Celtics fan? Kyrie, what is that a fair statement he's made, or is this Kyrie, just living up to his reputation once more?
Well, let me just preface this with exactly the first thing I thought, and then me being a responsible analyst. The first thing I thought was Jared Allen. I would overpay for him as a Celtics fan. But realistically, I honestly don't think that Kyrie meant to throw his teammates under the bus, but therein is the problem with Kyrie's style of leadership. Now, I've seen suggestions out there that he is influenced by Kobe Bryant in terms of being an instigator, and that there is some guesswork that some of what this, speaking of poking the bear, is exactly that he's trying to motivate his team in a very Kobe Bryant sort of way. And you can think what you want to think about whether or not that's a good strategy or not. I think it is absolutely the worst style of leadership, but I believe that it's good for his team, whatever the team is, and that it's just their fault when they don't respond. They just don't have what it takes to be a championship team. And so in his mind, I'm imagining, I have no proof that this is a fact, I think that he thinks he is going to push those who should be with him to stick with him and those who should not out. And sure, maybe that is a real, high-level, deep strategy that works. But from where I sit, it alienates teams and crushes potential, as we saw. Now, I'm not going to take a big, steaming dump on Kyrie over some of the things Celtics fans did because, his tenure in Boston was colored by more things than this idiotic style of leadership, and I feel bad for Nets fans for having to put up with it. I see a lot of the same Stockholm syndrome going on that even myself was a bit of a victim of, trying to rationalize. But like, as a person, I understand, at least I think I understand more about Kyrie with some space. But that said, it doesn't really put the Nets in a really enviable position going forward, because it's not like you can just move him. I don't know. What do you see this as a problem? What he's doing, what he's saying, and if so, what would you do about it?
I think it's an ill-advised style of leadership, as you've sort of hinted at. It's the difference between him and Kobe is vast in terms of whether or not a team is more or less successful on the floor, I think. I mean, you can argue what you want about using analytics about Kobe, but I think there is no argument that if you had to pick one or the other, you would be picking Bryant. That goes without saying. In terms of, it just seemed odd timing as well, because he's just come back. This was his third game back, and he played really well in his first game back and shot some like 91% from the floor or something in his first game back. And in this game in particular, I believe he'd shot 6 of 23 or something horrific, and then to turn around and trash, maybe or not, it wasn't intended to be trashing his teammates, but there's comments in there, if you sift through it, and yes, if we put it under a microscope, it looks worse, but there are comments in there which suggest a lack of self-awareness, and I'm not sure I want my franchise player who talks openly in the media to be unaware of the impact of what he says. And to be honest, I'm not even convinced he is a franchise leader. I think he's a great secondary player.
Agreed.
To your star, secondary star. But in terms of leadership, he's never led anyone anywhere.
It's true. He really hasn't. I mean, his track record is terrible so far, and he still believes that this is a skill that he has. And this came up in a group chat that I was in recently, where he's kind of like, I think, the Robert Sarver of team leaders. He's been very successful at a thing, and then he comes into this new context and just assumes he's going to be successful there too. So he just does the things that have worked for him, I guess, in this other context, and expects it to work, and it keeps blowing up and catching on fire just the same way that the Suns have under Sarver's tenure. And he just keeps thinking it's going to be okay for some reason, I guess convinced by the genius of his real genius, which is on the basketball court.
Yeah, well, that's the thing that you always have to sort of discount whatever he says anyway, is the fact that on the court he is the elite of the elite. When he's healthy, when he's playing well, he's easily a top 10 player. But the thing is, he's rarely healthy for a consistent and prolonged period, and then stuff like this sort of detracts from it. So yesterday they played Philadelphia again on MLK Day, and he was a late scratch for the game. He told reporters beforehand, another monologue that we can dig into now. When I was out those 7 weeks and not saying anything, people are still saying things about me. It's inevitable. They crucified Martin Luther King for speaking about peace and social integration. You can go back to historical leaders and great people in society that do great things, and they're still going to talk expletive about them. It is what it is. I know what I stand for. I'm a great family man. I have great values, core values. This basketball stuff is a game at the end of the day. It's dramatised. It's entertainment for people and fans. I'm a human being at the end of the day. I'm going to keep reiterating that. But my job is making sure my teammates are great and our organisation is at a championship level. So I kind of agree that we do sensationalise things. But if we didn't, the NBA wouldn't be the multi-billion-dollar league it is, which enables him to pay him and allow him to live the lifestyle he does. I found it interesting that he managed to refer to himself in the same vein as MLK, which might not have been intentional. I don't know, but it just made me chuckle. just fantastic sound bites from him.
He's
what are
good
your
for
thoughts on that
content,
quote?
man. He's great for content. I really, honestly cannot tell if he meant to compare himself to MLK or if he was just using a general example of someone who had to live their life under a microscope. Though I think this comparison would be a lot more valid if people shot at Kyrie Irving's house. Not that I want them to, or that the FBI was sending him letters convincing him to try to kill himself. I mean, that's the ridiculousness of this comparison, because he does live in a fishbowl and people do talk about things, but the thing he's not realizing is, unlike Martin Luther King, who is involved in this, or was involved in a very radical venture that at the time, compared to now, was much less popular than the thing that Kyrie is involved in, which is trying to win a championship. And even with the people who hate him, they don't hate him like that. So, I mean, it was kind of a tone-deaf comparison. But that said, he does have a point that he is in the fishbowl, but the fishbowl is what is contributing to it. And he said some things earlier in the season that I thought were really promising, that seemed to acknowledge the fact that he is at least partially in control of the narratives that are swirling around him, and he's choosing or had chosen in the past to engage them in a way that gave a lot of fuel to people who maybe don't have the most scrupulous intent in how they cover his words. And in turn, it just creates this really negative cycle that some players are a lot better at managing. And I suspect, again, this is me, just throwing spaghetti at the wall here to see what sticks. I suspect that this idea of how to lead through antagonism is directly clashing with this revelation that it also creates negative publicity. And I don't know if it's just an issue of him trying to find a comfortable medium between the attention he wants and the attention he doesn't, but at some point he's going to have to realize that he's bringing this on himself, and it's already started to, in my opinion, overshadow his ability as a basketball player. And eventually it's going to make him into someone people don't want to be around. If the wins don't start coming, if the rings don't start happening, then, people are going to tolerate it less, because why would you?
Yeah, I completely agree. It's going to be interesting to see as well, given that he does have this perception of himself as being the franchise leader, what it's going to be like when KD does come back. That's KD's contract is 3 years with a player option for year 4. If we get, and I pray that we do, if we get the KD that we've become used to on the court, it's going to be really interesting to see how Kyrie handles, no pun intended given his on-court abilities, but how he handles going back to that secondary role. And it's going to be interesting to see how their personalities mesh, because neither of them both of them have got a reputation of being abrasive, and just kind of odd, if that makes sense. And I'm not really sure as much as they talk about being friends, I'm not really sure when it comes down to the business side of the game, whether those, I guess, conflicting personalities are going to, not bristle over and cause some kind of fallout. It's going to be really interesting to see how the Nets situation develops over the next couple of years.
Yeah, I'm really interested in seeing how the dynamic works when they're both back on the court, and what ends up happening with DeAndre Jordan, for example. So far, they've been doing the smart thing and mostly been playing Jarrett Allen above him. But, I mean, are they going to do that when they are actually trying to compete for something? Is this like a gap year for Jordan? There's a lot of things going on with the Brooklyn Nets. I think they're managing it very well right now, particularly given Kyrie and his typical in-season shenanigans. But, next season, it's really going to be a fascinating experiment to see just how they all function together. It's almost kind of difficult to watch the Brooklyn Nets from afar this season, just because it's like a diluted version of the Celtics last season in terms of what Kyrie is doing with the team, with all the good stuff basically bracketed for some future date.
Yeah, it is. They've gambled hard. It could pay off spectacularly. it could go wrong. And you're right. It's a fascinating situation that we're gonna see unfold. It's going to be interesting to see what else Kyrie has to say over the next coming months. But let's leave that section there. We mentioned at the top of the show you like to talk about the potential for expansion. You have been involved in covering the G League expansion into Mexico. You were at the Global Games recently. We, being Europe, I'm speaking on behalf of now, we get our annual Global Game this Friday at 8:30 p.m. in Paris, where the Charlotte Hornets take on the Milwaukee Bucks. It's bittersweet for me because although I'm going to be able to be at the game, it's the first time in about 10 years when it's not been in London, which is it's disappointing that we haven't managed to retain the game, but I completely understand why. I just wanted to sort of chat through with you, because obviously it's a huge thing for the NBA to up and move its, both logistically, logistically and just in general, just to move a single game out of the country. I think were there 2 games in Mexico?
We had 2 games, one on December 12th, the other on December 14th. We've been doing 2 games a year for a while now down here, but it's usually with 3 teams, where one team plays the other team and then stays for the third team to come. So this was our first 4-team game, and I think it was particularly meaningful because really, it shows a gradual build, particularly, as you mentioned, the launching of Los Capitanes, which is an existing Liga team, becoming part of the G League in the future. They will be unaffiliated, but what it's demonstrating is an increased commitment to the Mexican market going forward. And while I haven't, given a direct confirmation that this is the plan, the collection of evidence and posturing by the league about these different aspects combined, along with other issues of expansion to build up the talent base, is that the league does want to move to 32 teams in the North American market, which means probably, if the G League experiment works here, that we would see in somewhere in the neighborhood of about 5 to 10 years an expansion here in Mexico City, as well as one other U.S. site. The presumption being Las Vegas is one of the options, but Seattle has been the leading option for some time, with Las Vegas making up a lot of ground. As you wrote about, actually, in our expansion series this summer. It's definitely been a more appealing situation, as the Key Arena situation with Seattle has not been, shall we say, ideal, though it has made a lot of progress in the last year in terms of renovations. It looks like it might feasibly be a modern NBA-ready arena going forward. There's some other issues going on that I'm not as well versed as some people out there, like Kevin Nisgoda, who worked with us on that series as well. Definitely check out their work for any more updates specifically about Seattle. But to kind of pull it back to a bigger picture thing, the league has been pushing for a long time now to really grow the game in terms of viewership, but also in terms of expansion, though in ways a lot of people might not assume. Not to keep returning to that expansion series, but we did discuss the possibility of a European team, specifically a London team. And the way things are now, it's looking like that's going to be a really a big logistical nightmare, basically, because teams have to take a week off almost combined before and on the other side to deal with jet lag and just the business of getting across to the other side of the Atlantic to play the games. However, the league has done a number of different things, ranging from expanding its player development initiatives around the world with a series of 7 academies. It may be a very big problem that they chose to do this very heavily with China, because I think 3 of the 7 academies are located in China. And after we saw what happened with the Houston Rockets and Daryl Morey near the beginning of the season with a tweet supporting Hong Kong, there may be a lot of second guessing of the wisdom of such a strong relationship, not forgetting about, one of David Stern's hallmark achievements in getting the league into China, but they may scale back a little bit just to be a little more secure, and that may make both sides a little more comfortable for reasons I'm not going to get into in this particular podcast. But let's just say that political fallout, kind of sent a shockwave through the league's expansion plans. And I think as a result of that, we may end up seeing a future where things like the new Basketball Africa League are more of a counterweight to that sort of a thing, trying to find more people from more parts of the world to then expand not just the North American market, but maybe one day in the future to have kind of more of a regional basketball network of FIBA and NBA affiliated networks, leagues like the Basketball Africa League, like the NBA. Maybe take the Euro League, have that become its own separate thing. Maybe take the NBL and an expanded network. Maybe the CBA, the Chinese Basketball Association, and get them all playing together for a summer thing that is either part of or parallel to the FIBA World Cup, that is more of an annual World Championship thing. Maybe not. I don't know. It was tried in the 1980s and 1990s. I think it was like that, the McDonald's Classic or something like that.
Yes.
Yeah, and the U.S. always won, which is not exciting to anyone. So.
And they didn't always send either the NBA champion or, even if they did, the best version of the NBA champion.
So there's work to do to expand this global vision, but they're doing some very wise things, I think, and adapting very well on the fly, in a way that is not necessarily offensive to their Chinese partners, but also maybe better. Maybe it's better to draw back from the Chinese market a little bit while China and the rest of the capitalist world suss out exactly how they're going to, approach really important things to each other, that I think both the NBA and China need to take a long, hard look at, because some of these things are just not going to fit very well. So they may need to draw those things back. But, again, we may see a 32-team North American NBA league, and we may see some tournament-oriented things, some expansion of the global games in coming years. It's a really exciting time, I think, for the NBA when you don't live in the United States.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic for out-of-country fans, foreign fans, in foreign markets, to get an opportunity to see an NBA game live. I kind of wish, similar to the way they dealt with doubleheaders previously in Mexico, where it was a 3-team situation, I kind of wish they did sort of a home and home. So, for example, the Hornets are the home team against the Bucks this Friday. It would be nice if, they're over here for a week. These guys are used to playing close to 4 games a week. Why couldn't they play 2 games? So Charlotte loses a home game and Milwaukee lose a home game in terms of their scheduling. I think there are things like that they can do to expand the offering over here.
I think I've heard. Let me just jump in real quick, because I heard, I can't remember who it was that suggested this, but it was a brilliant suggestion, and I think that this should just be what is done in the future. There should be global games all over the world featuring all 30 NBA teams, and they should be the preseason games, because you'll already be overseas, so you don't need to worry about adjusting in the middle of the season. There won't be that many games in the first place. And the rest of the local teams, the local fans for the local teams, they see those games all year long. They have plenty of home games. They don't need to catch a preseason game. They can watch, 41 games in their home market if that's important to them. So I think that's a beautiful solution. NBA, if you're listening, consider this idea maybe, to avoid the jet lag, to boost the league's profile around the world and have way more of these global games happening. I know for a fact here in Mexico City, for example, we have a lot of religious holidays in the middle of December, which is when we've been holding them, and it makes the city extra congested already, even before the NBA stuff starts happening. So, I mean, I'm sure that's not the only place, where things like this, where we have overlapping schedule conflicts. There's not that many, early fall, end of summer. There's not that much going on in terms of holidays, at least not that people are going to be upset about basketball games coinciding with. So just a thought.
I'm very much open to the idea of more games taking place around the world. I think the suggestion that it's preseason games is imperfect in that no one takes the preseason seriously.
That's a good point.
Players don't log the heavy minutes, so are you at risking their sort of essentially exhausting foreign interest? Because what's the point going to the game if I'm not going to see the stars actually play and put their effort in?
I hadn't thought of that, actually. No, that's a really good point, actually.
I just think you'd get fan fatigue essentially. Like, oh great, another preseason game. I know they do sell out, and part of that is the spectacle of it, and it would sell out for a long time. But I think eventually, if you're sending out the stars and they're not playing, what is the foreign fan going to turn up for? What they're going to get a subpar quality of product essentially. And then in terms of we've got the preseason games in China as we saw this year, and the return to the NBA. And I know like you say the start of the season isn't necessarily as important, but there's definitely a jet lag or similar effect.
We've seen some real impact on some of the teams that did do some of that travel. But as a counterpoint, you could argue that if all the teams are dealing with some extent of this, or at least a large number of them, it would help offset that a bit. And to your
equalize
and to your point of stars playing, maybe they should still keep having the premier, like the big cities, London, Paris, Mexico City. Maybe they should still keep having games like that on a semi-rotating basis mid-season as well. There is still something to that. I've heard suggestions about if they do have a mid-season tournament, that would be a good way to do that sort of a thing as well. But I do think that there is something to expanding into new places that aren't getting any global games. We could send, those matches there instead of the marquee ones where, not to say that London or Mexico City deserves more than these other places, but they do have an established history supporting these types of events, that people turn out for them with regularity. They fill the stadiums. They make it an event in a way that, maybe will happen in these new locations. Maybe it won't. It's really hard to say at this point. But I do think that there is a way to do things like this to keep expanding the games that are played that can be done intelligently in ways that won't necessarily have as big of a drag as we were seeing, like with the early start of, I think it was the Memphis Grizzlies that went to India, and teams that went to China, the Brooklyn Nets, for example, coming back and not really having the best start to their season because they have, not just with in terms of jet lag, but they were also in a really awkward situation, to speak of the China situation, sequestered in their rooms, not really being able to talk about things in a normal way in front of the media. There's a lot of other pratfalls that can come with expanding the game. So another thing I think that the league needs to be considering too is hiring some social scientists to help them, work through some of these potential geopolitical pratfalls that could interrupt expansion in the league. I think it's really time that they spend a little bit more time thinking about the potential impact culturally of expansion as well.
What about moving the All-Star game? The league takes a whole week off for that. Why not tour that around the world? Huge fan draw. The majority of the tickets are usually sold. Well, I say sold, are usually for corporate partners. Most of these corporate partners are international businesses.
Most of the people who are going to this game are well enough off that they can afford a plane ticket overseas as well. If we're being honest, so I personally don't have any issue with it. There is, an argument that people in the States are going to make. Well, these are mostly from our cities and blah blah blah. Well, that's true, but again, as I said about the preseason games, these people, they get 41 games a year plus whatever, postseason games they get. So just be a little more generous, guys. It's going to make your league that much more interesting with that much more cash flowing into it. Why not?
Yeah, I agree. Well, NBA Paris this Friday. As I said at the start, I'm looking forward to seeing it. I can't believe we're actually getting to see the reigning MVP in action, albeit on the visiting team. It's probably going to be a one-sided affair, but still, this is, it's good to have a team that is a potential title contender touring Europe. I remember a couple of seasons ago when the Celtics and the 76ers played in London. That was a big game for us because no one thought the two teams were going to be as good as they were that year. Let's keep it in sort of the realm of how successful the NBA is being around the world. Let's talk about the NBA's most popular jersey and team merchandise lists, which were released last Friday. So the the top 5 for player most popular jerseys are LeBron James, Giannis Antetokounmpo, Stephen Curry, Jason Tatum. Are you surprised by that one at number 4?
Frankly speaking, I absolutely am. I love Jason Tatum. I think he is going to have a ceiling of borderline to MVP level player. But I mean, in my mind, he is still at least a season away from being the number 4 jersey sales person in the NBA, just based on what we are seeing from him. But I mean, if he is connecting with a younger generation and they are eating up his jerseys, I certainly, as a Celtics fan and analyst, am not in any way going to complain. I will also add that the top 2 teams selling the merchandise so far this season are the Celtics and Lakers. And, I definitely wanted to see the Celtics and Lakers coming back to relevance, but the path that they have taken so far has just not in any way been the path back to relevance for both teams. And it's been kind of entertaining now that we've dug out of, to bring back up a certain ghost, Kyrie Irving's situation with the team. But I'm just curious, is it, as a non-invested person, what your thoughts are on the impact of this rivalry compared to some of, like we're looking at Zion Williamson at being number 15 on the jersey sales. If you had asked me at the beginning of the year whether I thought Jason Tatum would be ahead of Zion Williamson, never mind, 11 spots behind, it just seems absurd to me. So, I'm just curious what your thoughts are on how these jersey sales reflect the current state of the NBA in terms of viewership. Because, as I said, we all expected Zion to be a major force in the NBA in terms of viewership this season, and he's been a complete non-factor other than when he's getting shots up at shoot-around recently.
Well, I think this is quickly becoming the Kyrie Irving podcast. I do wonder how much of the rise of Jason Tatum jersey sales is a rebound from owners of Kyrie Irving jerseys.
Interesting.
It's great that he's up there. He's a phenomenal talent. I'm not at all surprised that the Lakers and Celtics are the top 2 teams in merchandise. I think the last couple of years, the Golden State Warriors have been there. Obviously, they've been decimated by exits and injuries. And then essentially you've just got those with historically large fan bases, third of the Philadelphia 76ers, creeping into the top 5 for the first time in franchise history of the Raptors, and that's obviously bandwagon championship memorabilia stuff. 5th, Milwaukee Bucks. The Warriors have dropped to 6th. Houston, 7th. Okay, so if this is global, then maybe we've seen some reaction from China, because you'd think that would probably be a bit higher given their popularity or perceived popularity in China. 8, the Bulls. Somehow the Bulls are always on this top 10, even though the last time they were a top 10 team it would have been close to 2011, I guess, when it was the young Bulls, Derrick Rose, Luol Deng team, Noah, Taj Gibson. Miami Heat, okay, fine. Brooklyn Nets, that's probably a sign that Kyrie and KD are selling jerseys, and in fact that bears over into the individual players list. Zion, you say he's been a non-factor season. To be fair, he's due to step on the court Thursday, I think, the 22nd, or it might even be tomorrow, 22nd, I think it might be, and he's already 15th, and that's in a incredibly small market. I mean, Anthony Davis struggled to sell jerseys in New Orleans. He often, I'm not sure he cracked the top 10.
At all. I mean, I used to live in New Orleans for 2 years, and you would never even know there was a basketball game going on, no matter who they were playing. But if the Saints or LSU team catches a cold, then the newspapers are completely covered. So, I mean, that's partially a factor. You are right of it being a basketball city or not being a basketball city, but I do think that there is something to the lack of Zion because of his preseason injury. Not just impacting jersey sales, but impacting viewership. Kevin O'Connor was recently commenting on his regular Ringer podcast about the impact of Zion being out on viewership, and it's not a small one. If you look at preseason mentions, for example, on Google, on Reddit, you would have expected a correlated, explosion in terms of jersey sales this season. And like I said, I didn't expect him to be number one, but 15 is just absurd to me that someone who was being looked at as the next big thing, the biggest buzz really since LeBron James came into the league at this point, decades ago, nearly, it just seems to me that there is more going on in terms of viewership in the league that you can see in things like jersey sales than just cord cutting. So there is something going on, and it's being reflected in both the concrete sales, but also the ways that we measure how the league is engaged with. And there's also something to be said, as you mentioned, players moving teams. I hadn't actually thought about Kyrie Irving, people wanting new jerseys that they can wear. I actually have to wonder how much of a factor that is in changing these things from season to season.
Yeah, I do. Well, I say it seems like a factor. It's not stopped LeBron from retaining the number one spot, and I'm guessing a lot of people bought his jersey last year as well, given he was number one then, and they're just buying, more and more people buying the same jersey. It is an interesting one with Tatum, especially considering there is argument as certainly he's got the highest ceiling, but there's argument now whether he's even the best player on that roster, and yet he is quite easily the highest selling jersey. There is another Celtic on the top 15. That's Kemba at 14. It really is quite fascinating to look through it. I'm surprised number 6, Luka Doncic, he's not higher, to be honest, given the All-Star game voting, the general just complete adulation of him on the floor. It's interesting. Kevin Durant's still 12th on the list, and he's yet to step on the floor. It really is quite an interesting look through the top 15. Russell Westbrook is 13th. That kind of surprises me, given that Harden's there as well. Harden was 5th, by the way.
And how much they hated him in Houston too. They hated him in Houston.
So I wonder, maybe that's China purchasing those as well. It's really interesting to look at. You mentioned sort of the whole sort of TV viewership, the impact of Zion there. I'm sorry, I'm jumping around a bit now. And it absolutely is a key thing that the NBA must, is overtly aware of. So at one point there was talk he was going to be coming back last week. Then there was talk that he was going to be coming back what would have been the MLK game against Memphis, but New Orleans felt that was too big a stage, wanted to remove some of the pressure, so they pushed it back to the 22nd tomorrow against the Spurs. And the NBA's response of that was to change the schedule so that Denver at Houston will no longer be televised on ESPN, but San Antonio at New Orleans will. So there is definitely an awareness by the league that this entity, and I'll talk, I appreciate he is a human being and a very first and foremost, but from the NBA's perspective, this asset has not been exploited yet, and they need to start doing it straight away. Essentially, they need to get going with him. I mean, the pre-season before the injury happened, there was sort of a record number of national games for the Pelicans that never had Anthony Davis had that many. That they were so acutely aware of wanting to promote and market this guy, because they're kind of putting a lot of chips into the basket that he is the future of the league.
And there is something to be said for the fact that Steph Curry is out, Kevin Durant is out, Klay Thompson is out, and so on and so forth. So this brings us back to this, there just seems to be this cycle of related issues that we keep working through as podcasters, as analysts, as writers, of how the league has too many people injured, which is hurting viewership, and viewership is down because of things going on with a number of games, and the number of games is causing people to become injured, and we just keep talking in cycles and talking about the symptoms that we see in viewership and in jersey sales. And now we have news that the league is not going to pursue reducing the schedule to 78 games this April with a vote for the Board of Governors because they don't think they have the votes for it. And I'm wondering, if we are ever going to get to the point where we seriously do consider lowering the number of games for any reason, whether it's little tiny bites like this proposal would have been, whether it is just a mass reduction, whether we shave time off. I don't know what the answer is for these things, but we just keep cycling through these topics, and new wrinkles emerge, like the fact that they are now not going to do anything about it. But at some point, I'm not sure that we're going to be able to continue ignoring the number of games. I think for a while that debate was, is there too many games? I kind of feel like this is all peripheral to the way that the game's played now, which isn't going to change in a hurry, and the number of games there are, which can be changed in a hurry. So just some general thoughts on that.
Yeah, it is an interesting concept, and I had Jeff Stotts on the podcast recently discussing it. He does a lot of injury analysis and sort of consults for a few NBA teams, and he was saying that the last 2 years or so that the numbers have spiked, the injury numbers have spiked, but prior to that we were seeing a downwards trend in injury, or minutes lost to injury we'll call it. So it'd be interesting to know the split of what could be considered repetition injuries versus impact injuries. So the ACL popping because someone has been playing basically an NBA season all the way through AAU, so they've already got 10 years on the clock by the time they're a rookie, versus someone like the first one that springs to mind is slightly vomit inducing, but the Gordon Hayward ankle roll ankle roll is a really understatement, but you know what I mean, sort of that freak accident. So it would be interesting to know that split and to understand that, because the one thing that's remained constant through the NBA's life cycle is the 82 games. So what is it now that's changed that's increasing injuries? Is it that in order to stay relevant and to stay competitive, NBA players are playing essentially 365 days a year, because they obviously play through the game all through the season. Then I think it was CJ McCollum on the Pull Up podcast said he takes 2 weeks downtime, but in that 2 weeks downtime he's still doing aerobic activity and still doing lifting. Then he's back on the court. Is it then that we need to understand more about the benefits of rest and implementing them, whether it's mandated rest through the off season for a proportion of it to allow bodies to recover and recharge, whether it's addressing things at the AAU level? So the NBA took ownership of that and started. They've obviously implemented guidelines in the past few years about limiting hours and times like that, but actually controlling it so that the product by the time it gets to the league isn't as essentially a car with 80,000 miles on the clock, and we see, and I'm not saying this could have been avoidable in any way, shape or form, but we see another horrific ending to an MVP arc career of like Derrick Rose, for example, where and I realise this is complete speculation and finger in the air, but if he hadn't have gone through the basketball upbringing he had, would he have got injured when he did? And equally, would he have been as good as he was? There's so many intangibles that I think it's beyond. Like I agree for a long time that change the 82 game schedule makes no sense. It's just a random number used to maximise income when the league was a barnstorming cash cow essentially that just needed money as quickly as possible in order to stay viable. But it's just there's so many things. I'm not sure that certainly I don't think 4 games makes a difference. There's so much that needs looking at from a very, very wide perspective, and I wonder, the NBA must have tabs on it. They're not stupid.
Absolutely. I think that there is something to be said too with recognizing the fact that we are not talking about all 450 to 500 players in the NBA at a given time either, because a lot of those players, while they do, get plenty of miles on their body as well, we are mostly concerned with, and not to say we are not concerned with injury among all players, because we are. Obviously, they're humans. They deserve to be able to work without literally destroying their body in a way that can endanger their job. But at the same time, we also want to take extra careful care with the people who, as you noted when we were talking about, preseason games versus global games, etc., the fans are tuning in to see are the stars. So we need to be paying the most attention to how they are used, and because it's their injuries, and there are season-ending injuries all the time. Max Strus tore his ACL. And Max Strus, you're listening to this right now, you're probably like, who is Max Strus? I know who Max Strus is because I covered the Celtics, and he ended up being cut at the last minute at the end of summer to end up latching on with the Chicago Bulls, and he blew his ACL out, and nobody is going to hear about that other than people who were already keyed in to his potential in the NBA, and that's important. We need to fix things for players like him too, but if we're being honest, his injury is as horrible as it is, it's not affecting the viewership of the league. So what we need to do is, in my mind, focus more intently on the things these players who drive the league's subscriptions in terms of League Pass, who cause people to buy tickets, to cause them to buy merchandise, all of that sort of a thing. These are the people who play, upwards of 20 minutes a game, arbitrary number, but you get the idea. Looking at those people and how their lives are affected by the number of minutes in the game, the way that they play in a game, how the game has changed, whether it correlates to injury. And as you hinted at, there are so many factors. I mean, like one of the things they're doing now is they're slowly getting rid of shoot around around the league, so players can get more sleep. Because you probably, as a listener to this podcast, heard about the lack of sleep and how being unaware of your environment at your highest levels, it's like playing drunk. You might as well be intoxicated if you are, down 6 hours of sleep on a week from a normal amount of sleep. By the end of the week, you are just not really in control of your articulations in the same sort of a way that you would be under normal circumstances, and that is also a potential factor for injury. So, I mean, there's so many different factors going into it that it's having, it's manifesting whatever it, in quotation marks, is in really easily measurable ways that are starting to, at least this season, have a really negative impact. And it's really hard to pull apart, going back to China, for example, what that has to do with things, what the injuries had to do with things, what, changes in competition mean for the league. I mean, we don't know. People say they're real happy about the Golden State Warriors not being a behemoth for the first time in a half decade, but are they?
I think that's fair, because for so long people were crying out for the end of this super team, and they went from being the darlings of the NBA to these horrific monsters, and then the minute they are not good, the viewership drops. I wonder if it's a case of people love to. I think the people who are more vocal about not liking it and wanting it to end are actually the minority. They're just the noisier party.
I think so.
You've got a lot of casuals who sort of just drop in and like, this team are really good. I know about them. I've heard about them. I've seen an advert with X player and Y player. Therefore, I will watch this. And if those guys are all sat down, then it's about capturing. Because let's face it, in this world, you and I are in hook, line, and sinker. It can be ridiculously. It could be a poor game. We're still going to go and watch it. It's the casual guys, the essentially they're like swing voters, I guess. It's those people who just are very laissez-faire about it all, can go one way or the other. They're the guys that the NBA needs to hook in to build up the viewership again.
That is actually an interesting perspective. I've actually published papers on motivating likely voters to vote, and that's an avenue that the NBA may be looking into themselves. If they're not, they should. How do you swing a person who is on the edge to do a thing you want them to do? Obviously, we need to know more about these other factors that may be impacting the league in terms of growth, in terms of viewership. But really, I think more than any other league in North American sports, they are poised to put data to work for them in ways that can not just make the game better, but also make it more interesting for the casual fan. I'm really curious to see what they do with all of this information, because the league is really at an important crossroads right now in terms of what its future is going to look like. Is it going to remain a mostly U.S.-based league? Is it going to really take a big step forward into the global sports market in the same sort of a way that FIBA and that soccer have kind of had a more established hold on international sports, or is it going to kind of look at China, look at what's going on and say, okay, we'll keep our feelers out there and see what does well and throw money into it, but maybe we don't need to expand as aggressively as we did. Maybe we were overextending ourselves and we're suffering at home as a result.
Yeah, potentially. We are on essentially a precipice for a potentially entirely different league. At some, and it's quite exciting to see what they'll do. They obviously have tons and tons of data, which is where they're going to base any decision on, and something needs to happen because we're clearly seeing this year that if the stars aren't there, the audience isn't. Pretty
simple when you get down to it. The question is, why aren't they there? Yeah. Why are they really not there? I mean, yes, obviously Kevin Durant is not playing with an injury, but get into the root of what these problems are. I think that's the key.
And I think we could talk about it for hours, but we can leave it at that. That seems a good point to leave it this week. But that has been a pretty good deep conversation, actually. If you are not already subscribed, please do so through your podcast provider. Also, rate and review us. It would be great to hear what your guys' thoughts are. Give us some feedback on the show. If you're not already following us on social media, as I said at the top of the show, it is at Double Clutch UK across all social media platforms. Justin, you can be found at Justin Quinn with 3 N's. Is that right on Twitter?
That is correct. JUSTINQINNN.
Excellent. And I'm at Mike Miller _time. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you, Justin, for joining. We'll catch you next week with some more NBA talk and random hypothesizing and debate. See you next time. Thanks for listening.